And we're back. Now this is different. This is interesting. It seems that from time to time, TYT can be not entirely wrong. Doesn't mean they're, doesn't mean they're right. It's just, not completely fucking wrong like they often are. So, this may be a short one. I mean, it's actually, I think it's longer than the last two clips from them, but it may actually be shorter because there'll be less for me to actually criticize about them, oddly enough. Because, I mean, obviously they get some things wrong, but, I think they get quite a bit right, so, it's a novelty. It's a novelty. Let's show voice alert. Let's begin.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has addressed the accusations lodged against it by the United States in regard to a possible invasion into Ukraine. This is an ongoing escalation in tensions. It's been happening for weeks now, and unfortunately, it appears that the United States, in some instances, might be exaggerating the threat. That's according to Ukrainian officials. Now, let me give you the details on what Putin said during his joint press conference with the leader of Hungary. Putin, speaking in Moscow in a news conference with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, said the Kremlin was studying US and NATO replies to recent Kremlin proposals seeking to check NATO military activity in the region. But it is already clear, says Putin, that Russia's fundamental concerns have been ignored. NATO refers to the right of countries to choose freely, but you cannot strengthen someone's security at the expense of others. And what he's referring to is the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. That has been a red line for Putin, and he's been vocal about that for quite some time now.
I can't remember for sure, but it seems like I remembered hearing something maybe back during the Bush administration that, there was, seems like briefly there was some talk of Russia joining NATO at some point. Am I hallucinating? Did that happen or not? I can't remember for sure. I wasn't really paying attention to political shit back then. But if it did, that was such a missed opportunity, because that is absolutely what should have happened. I mean, let's look back at history. The United States and NATO lied to the Soviets and said, told the Russians, hey, it's okay to let the Soviet Empire collapse, and disintegrate into multiple states. We promise we're not going to expand NATO closer to your borders, so you don't have to worry about, about your security or whatever. It's fine. That was a lie, and we proceeded to expand NATO, basically right up to their fucking border, and been trying to expand it even more, ever since then. And Russia doesn't want us putting our missiles, right next to their borders so that we can hit their targets in their territory easily. And they also don't want us setting up interceptor missiles right next to their borders so that we can try to shoot down their missiles if they try to shoot them at us. It's a very understandable concern that they have. And and Russia has, anyway, but if at some point there we could have gotten the Russians on board to be part of NATO, we wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't have any problem at all right now in Ukraine, or or the opportunity for some idiot over here to manufacture a problem over there. That wouldn't be a problem, because once Russia was in NATO, then we could get all the other former Soviet states into NATO as well, and we'd all be allies, and it'd be really hard for anybody to explain attacking your own fucking allies. And it also would probably have helped the Russians, be more on our side than they currently are, on the Chinese side of things, and it would have isolated China. You know, China wouldn't. Yeah, it's like China has a pretty big ally right now with Russia, but even though they, like when it comes right down to it, they don't actually like the Russians and vice versa. Like China doesn't have anybody that they haven't pissed off. Like they pissed off basically every neighbor that they have because they're assholes. But the Russians are certainly going to work with the Chinese rather than the West because the West has proven we can't be trusted. Our leaders have proven that they can't be trusted, I should say. But, if we'd had better leaders, less corrupt leaders, then it would have been real nice to have Russia as part of our alliance. And if the Chinese wanted to dick with anybody, they'd have practically the entirety of the rest of the world's military strength firmly set against them. As it is, as it is, you've got two of the major players in the world, the Russians and the Chinese, are in a position they're in a position where they feel they have to team up in order to face off against the West. And I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see where the post-United States world winds up. That's going to be an interesting thing because I think the EU has already proven it's not very stable and it's probably going to collapse. So the European Union's not going to be a singular. It's never. I mean, it never was, but it's never going to become what they wanted it to be. They want it to be a United States of Europe. That's not going to happen. That's clearly not going to happen. It was never going to happen for that matter. But anyway, it's going to fall apart. The European Union project is going to fall apart. And so that's not going to exist. I mean, presumably the separate European countries will retain their sovereignty, but they will probably choose to ally with one another for mutual defense and whatnot. And possibly the same will be true of successor states here in the former U.S. once the U.S. breaks up. But, it's going to be interesting to see, I keep being told by certain parties that the Chinese aren't interested in becoming a hegemon. They just want regional, superiority or whatever. They want to control their sphere of influence. And it's like, the way they act towards everybody, I'm not so sure that I believe that. Maybe, but, we can hope. But I don't know that I believe that. Although China's not quite as stable as some people make it out to be, so it's always possible they'll collapse as well. Not sure what their collapse would look like. It probably wouldn't look quite the same. Wouldn't be as much fracturing of the actual, political control of their country. But economic collapse, could see the CCP get ousted if there's enough people who, decide they want them gone. I don't know. It'd be interesting. It'd be really interesting if that happened, because if China goes under for whatever reason, however that would happen, and obviously we're going to fall apart, that might leave the Russians in, a more dominant position in the world than anybody else. Like that'd be really weird. The Russians would wind up being, kind of the de facto, superpower. That'd be interesting. All right, well, enough theorizing. Let's get on with this.
And it's because of the fact that Russia shares a border with Ukraine, a 1,300-mile long border. And when you consider this in the context of Ukraine receiving billions of dollars of weaponry from the United States, you can understand why Russia is concerned about a potential security threat for them. At the same time, the United States continues to say that the potential invasion of Russia into Ukraine is imminent, even though not just one, but several Ukrainian officials have countered that. They claim that is not true. They believe that that is leading to an escalation that's unnecessary. It's leading to panic that's unnecessary. And I'll give you more details into that in just a second.
So it's nice to know that when whoever was responsible, the CIA or Soros or whoever the fuck, kind of engineered the toppling of the pro-Russian government in Ukraine and replaced it with a pro-Western government. Kind of interesting to see that even when you do that, you can still wind up with people that aren't all that cooperative when you try to use them to start a goddamn war.
I just want to be clear that while the United States continues to note that there are as many as 100,000 Russian troops at their border with Ukraine, there are as many as 320,000 American troops in Europe who have remained there even after the Soviet bloc collapsed. So Russia sees that as provocative. Russia sees that as a threat. And as I mentioned earlier, Russia sees Ukraine joining NATO as a threat. Now, US officials have said that the West did not bow to Russia's demand that NATO end its open door policy and bar countries such as Ukraine and Georgia from joining the military alliance. And I also want to note that NATO has expanded from 16 countries during the collapse of the Soviet Union to 30 members. And the whole point of NATO was to check Russia. So that's why Russia sees NATO as a threat. That's why Russia sees Ukraine joining NATO as.
And if we'd managed to get Russia to be part of NATO, then NATO could still have a real purpose, which would be to check China.
A provocative move and something that puts their security in jeopardy. And Russia, for its part, claims that it has no intention to invade Ukraine. I mean, obviously, I take what they say with a grain of salt, but you do have to see.
Well, I suspect that Russia has no desire to invade Ukraine, but I suspect that they will if they feel they have no other option. So, if our resident in chief decides that he just wants to, continue to beat the war drums, and he's gonna, do a false flag or whatever it takes to get us involved in a fucking war over there, the Russians probably will decide that, yep, we've got no choice. We're going to have to take over Ukraine, or at least part of it. They'll probably take over the remaining pro-Russian populated area of the country, if nothing else. I'll try to I'll try to remember to link it in the description. There's a military analysis video from Binkov's Battlegrounds or whatever. Might be interesting for people to take a look at, about Russia possibly, what it might look like if Russia decided to actually invade Ukraine. But I think that sadly to a certain extent, possibly the best outcome. Well, the best outcome obviously is that the idiots over here, our idiots that are running our side of things, think better of it and decide, okay, let's not have a war. But if they insist on it, then I think, quite frankly, the best outcome in that case would actually be for the Russians to sweep in and conquer Ukraine. The Tsar, Putin, the Tsar, hopefully will enjoy that rare thing, a short, victorious war. It will be better. It will be better for us. It will be better for us in the United States, the citizenry at least, to, it will be better for our future if instead of getting into an actual shooting war with the Russians, that the Russians just sweep in and take the whole, damn thing over really quickly. If it ends quickly and decisively in Russia's favor, then hopefully that will put an end to any thoughts of adventurism in Eastern Europe for our current regime. And with any luck, the current regime will be ousted soon afterwards. Anyway. Anyway.
This situation as incentives and disincentives. There are a lot of disincentives, a lot of deterrents already in place to prevent Russia from invading Ukraine. Cenk.
Okay, so I'm going to solve this in a little bit.
He's going to solve it.
Okay.
Oh my God. He couldn't solve us a ham sandwich. Holy shit.
So good news for
solve it.
everybody, okay? But first, we've got some strange bedfellows here. So I am not a big fan of Vladimir Putin, to say the least.
Of course not. You hate him because he's based.
Might even be slightly famous for that. Viktor Orban is a terrible guy.
No, he's not. He is doing great things for his country. He's protecting his people. I know you think that makes him an evil racist or some bullshit, but he just recognizes that his people deserve to have their country be theirs. And that's more true. I mean, it's kind of still true over here in America, despite everything, but it's even more true for for old world countries where the native population has lived there basically for fucking ever. Over here, it's still kind of the same because originally the United States was founded as an English nation. So, and the whole bit about for our posterity, that means for our descendants, the descendants of the original colonists, the settlers. So, anyway, but such realities are lost on all leftists, especially Chunk Yogurt here.
He's pretty much a fascist in Hungary, but Hungary's part of NATO.
Yep.
So he probably shouldn't be there at all with Russia, and he's obviously reaching out as someone who's in.
There are very few good leaders in the world, and naturally, if Chink hates them, probably they're one of the best. So Putin is a pretty good leader. That doesn't mean that he's going to do things that are great for America, but he's going to do things that are great for Russia, which is what a leader should do. It could be argued, after a fashion, that Xi Jinping is a good leader, great leader. I don't know that I'd go that far because, I don't know, the CCP's relationship with their own people is... I can't think of a correct word to use. Let's just, it's complicated. Let's just say that, I guess. It's complicated. And sometimes good, sometimes not good at all. Anyway, but, you have a few good leaders. You had Trump, who, we know what happened there. I won't go into it, but you know what happened. And you have Viktor Orban. He's one of the few in Europe that's a decent leader. And Bolsonaro down in Brazil, who, from the sound of it, they're determined to either cheat him out of office or murder him, one or the other. It's like he's either going to be assassinated or he's going to, have the same thing happen to him that's happened to happened to the Orange Man. So I don't know. The sooner the globalist shitbags are all rounded up and executed in some sort of Nuremberg trial type situation, it's like people need to recognize that they are guilty of crimes against humanity, and it could be that that's gonna happen. I am not gonna count on it, but it's possible because the whole global situation that shan't be named. I feel like that in some respects is a ticking fucking time bomb, and with the luck, it'll blow up in their face, and the normies will be out for blood once they realize what's been done to them. But only time will tell.
Incredibly right-wing and proto-fascist to a fellow
Sorry, but no, the fascists, Cenk, are collectivists. They're on the left. I know that you don't understand that. I know that so many leftists don't understand that, yes, the Nazis were left-wing. They weren't as far to the left as the commies were, but they were still on your side. So many people want to believe in that horse shit about balance or whatever. Like, oh, every side has its has its extremes that are just as bad as the extremes someplace else or what. No, that's not true. That's a goddamn lie.
Just and right winger and Putin. So already we've got a strange situation there. And then Tucker Carlson just last night not only attacked Republican senators that were warmongering against Russia,
Good.
but I give him credit on this one. Not a guy I give credit to very often. He called out their defense contractor donors.
Good.
Okay, that's real and that's true. And so he called out Lockheed Martin and others for contributing to Republican senators who now all of a sudden see Russia as a big, big threat.
Can I add something very quickly to that, Cenk? Just last week, on Friday actually, we covered a call that Raytheon executives had with their shareholders, and they were specifically talking about escalating tensions with Russia and how they plan to profit off of it. So we have to, again, think about the incentives and disincentives at play here. Continue.
Yeah. Now, so
Continue. Like she's in charge. Well, maybe she is. It is interesting, though, isn't it? I mean, like I said, this is why I decided to cover this video. It's fascinating that there are occasionally things like this situation in Ukraine that can actually bring elements of the left or even far left together with elements of the right. As much distance as there seems to be between the two sides in this day and age, how polarized we are on virtually every topic, there actually are some people on the left who are somewhat sane and don't fucking want a war with Russia. So, who'd have thunk it,
nonetheless, I think that America is on questionable grounds here. And
Definitely.
I think that Putin has an interesting point to make. Now, that is not something I say very often at all, almost never. And the reason is, how can you tell? Well, as Anna pointed out, the Ukraine.
And it will be interesting to see how this plays out. It is already interesting to see that the media, even the corporate media, does not, I mean, TYT's sort of corporate media, but they're not, I don't put them quite in the same category. They're close, but they're not quite the same thing. But they're kind of not in the exclusive club, as it were. But even the corporate media does not seem to be really backing the Democrats on this one. They I mean, the regime, the Biden regime, clearly wants a war. And whoever's propping him up, whoever's feeding him the good drugs, long enough for him to make occasionally halfway coherent speeches. The people that are managing him, they clearly want a fucking war. But even the mainstream leftist media does not appear to be jumping on board with it. That is, to me, a very interesting thing. Hope it's not just like some kind of fucking delay with them getting their marching orders. If the media starts pushing for it in some way, they start backing up the idea of a war with Russia, then I guess we'll know that, yep, the all the elements of the cabal are together on this one. Maybe there's a split in the cabal right now. Some of them want war and some of them don't. I don't know. Let's hope that the ones who don't want war prevail, because it could be very messy. Like I said, I hope that if it does happen, that it is over very quickly and ends decisively in Russia's favor. That will be, I think, the best outcome, apart from not having a war at all. But it's like, I've said this before, the last goddamn thing that we can possibly afford is to get into a direct shooting war with Russia, because they have the largest number of nukes on the planet, and we have the second largest. So between the two of us, if one side starts losing the temptation to go all in and nuke, the other is going to be too great. And we're going to wind up essentially exterminating the human well, not the human race, I suppose, but the human civilization. Human civilization, not just Western civilization, all of human civilization will essentially fall. So we can't fucking afford that, okay? So it needs to not happen.
Iranians are telling us, whoa, cool it. We don't think it's as big a threat as you guys are hyping it up to be.
Thank God.
Now, when the Ukrainians, who would be the ones in mortal danger, are telling us that they are not in mortal danger and that we're overhyping the threat, well, that gives you some pretty significant evidence, if not extraordinary evidence, of who's closer to being right here. And so now, again, that doesn't mean that it's not nuanced. I'll get into some more of that nuance in a second and solve it again as well.
Yes, he'll stop saying true and correct things, and he'll start to tell some lies, no doubt.
But you can tell there, we seem to be hyping it up in a way that is weird. So we'll come back to that in a second, yes.
So just to buttress your point and add some evidence to that, because it's one thing to say, Ukrainian officials don't want an escalation, they think this is exaggerated. Let's hear from a sociologist based in Ukraine. He spoke to Democracy Now! Just this morning about what Ukrainian intelligence is indicating in regard to a possible imminent threat from Russia. Let's watch.
Zelensky, but not only Zelensky, the Minister of Defense, the Secretary of the National Security Council, they all tell that according to Ukrainian data, according to Ukrainian intelligence, they don't see the massive invasion to Ukraine with occupation of the large territory of the big cities as likely, not only in the coming weeks, but maybe like in this year at least. So that's what the Ukrainian intelligence says.
And apologies, quick clarification, he's not based in Ukraine, he's in Dresden, Germany, but he's talking about what intelligence is saying on the ground in Ukraine. And this has been an ongoing issue. Biden had a call with Vladimir Zelensky just last week. It was a contentious call, it was a combative call, that's how it's being reported, because they disagree on how imminent this threat really is. Biden claims it is an imminent threat, whereas Ukraine claims no, that is not the case. And by exaggerating this threat, it is actually leading to a larger possibility of war.
Yeah, so it's not that.
Yes, it definitely sounded as though our senile leader was kind of, maybe on purpose, maybe by accident, telegraphing that, yeah, we want a war. We're going to have a war. If the Russians don't provide us with one, then God damn it, we will find a way, false flag, naturally, to get this bitch kicked off, without their cooperation. That seemed pretty clear. Yeah. It hasn't gone over well, like I said. So that's good. That's good that the response of the people and the public over here and the Ukrainians and, for that matter, the fucking media even, amazingly, has been kind of negative towards the idea. It's amazing. It's wonderful. I guess I don't know. Maybe they're just a little bit more sane than we might have thought. It's like they'd be okay with us going to war with some other third world power, perhaps, but but not a second tier power like Russia. It's like, yeah, maybe that's a bit much. So
Russian aggression hasn't happened before. It has, very significantly so, including Crimea, which was in Ukraine. So unlike the anti-imperialist fake left in America that is only concerned about American imperialism, I'm concerned about American imperialism and Russian and Chinese and any other authoritarian right-wing government in the world.
Cenk, the Chinese are literally communists. They are not right-wing. I know that you really desperately wish that authoritarianism automatically equaled right-wing, because that puts you on the side that's against authoritarianism, but it's not so. As a matter of fact, it tends to be the other way around. Authoritarianism goes hand in glove with the left because the fundamental underpinnings of leftist ideology is collectivism, which naturally leads to, authoritarianism. The cold indifference of the state that grinds the individual under its boot, whereas the fundamental underpinning of right-wing ideology is individualism that wishes maximum liberty for the individual. And while the individual easily suffers for the collective to do better, if the individual is put first and foremost and is allowed to prosper, then the collective, which is a group of individuals, will also prosper. So one ideology is clearly evil and wrong, and the other one is clearly, if not good, then at least, neutral. And, no, I'd say good. I mean, individual liberty is good. And it's correct. So anyway. All right, let's see how many other lies he's prepared to tell now that he's gotten over the initial truth-telling.
But in this case, when the Ukrainians are saying, we are not under threat, I don't know why you guys are saying this, that is a big, giant, flashing sign saying America's the one that's creating this problem, not Russia.
Correct, and amazing for him to say that when there's a Democrat in office. Like, really, it's amazing that he's able to do that.
Doesn't mean that he
the Democrats control everything but the Supreme Court, and they want to control that. It's been suggested numerous times, I believe, on TYT that they need to pack the court, because they want control of the judiciary just like they have control of Congress and the White House. So they want unfettered power. They want to seize all the reins of power for themselves. And right now the Democrats are effectively in complete charge of the country, and even though many people correctly see them as illegitimate, but nevertheless, they are in charge, and it's amazing to see him, because he believes that the Democrats are at least better, if not actually good or whatever, and he believes that all the Republicans are terrible people. So it's amazing to see him actually say that, America. I mean, he doesn't personalize. He doesn't say that, the Biden administration or anybody, it's like he doesn't personalize it, but he still admits that we kind of mean the Democrats because they're in charge right now, are at fault and are doing some fuckery.
He won't do it. He can't do it. He has amassed troops, apparently. And although now I even question the veracity of that, given what Ukrainian intelligence is saying, but if they're not concerned, that's a pretty good sign we shouldn't be concerned. So there's something weird going on here from the American side. In terms
yes, fuckery.
of how to solve it, look, Anna's right. Russia has legitimate concerns. Just because they're not us doesn't mean they don't have legitimate concerns. And just because they're wrong on many things doesn't mean they're not right on some things. So, and Russia,
of course, most of the things that he considers them wrong about, they're actually right about. But anyway,
is not wrong on anything. The current Russian government has been wrong many times because it's authoritarian. But do they have legitimate security concerns about us parking missiles all over their borders? Of course they do. Of course, Anna's right that we wouldn't stand for it if the Russians did it to us. In fact, that's not in dispute. That's what the Cuban Missile Crisis was about. When the Russians moved missiles into Cuba, we threatened world-ending nuclear war. So amassing troops on the border would have been the least of what we would have done if we were in Russia's situation. You just have to be honest about that. It's not that hard to be honest.
It's amazing to hear him say that. It's not that hard to be honest. It's like you're dishonest all the fucking time. But I am glad that you are at least honest now. When frankly a great deal is at stake. Possibly the future of our species. Certainly the future of our current civilization is at stake. And it's good to see that he is capable of being honest about something.
And now it looks like American media is beginning to catch on to that.
Yes.
So.
And that's, frankly, the corporate media, having that sort of, attitude is even more astounding than the Young Turks having this attitude. So, maybe we'll all live through it yet.
Would you like me to solve it now?
Well, before you solve it, just one other thing I want the audience to take into consideration. Remember, I mean, I'm old enough to remember when the United States was attempting to convince Americans that Russia was paying bounties to the Taliban.
Wait a minute. She's old enough to remember that. Didn't that happen just before Trump was? I mean, just a few years ago when Trump was in office. Weren't they doing that? Wasn't the media pushing that narrative of, oh, evil Russia? They've got they've got bounties out for our guys. It's like, I mean, am I wrong? I thought I remembered that happened under Trump. I mean, it may have happened before then too, but I'm pretty sure I remember that happening under Trump. That was a media narrative that they were pushing. It was bullshit, but they were pushing it.
For American soldiers in Afghanistan. And then that story turned out to be garbage. The Washington Post, all of a sudden they have to backtrack and retract the original reporting on that because that did not end up being true. So you have to take the situation, you have to, of course, be skeptical of the claims coming from both sides, but that, in my mind, is a clear example of the United States attempting to escalate tensions with Russia by accusing it of doing something that it was not actually doing. Doesn't mean that the Russian government is completely innocent, doesn't mean that we like Vladimir Putin, but it does mean—
Well, I kind of like him. I mean, obviously, I don't like him nearly as much as I would if I was Russian. But, he's a very, he's a figure that lends himself to very easy positive memeing, kind of like Trump. More so than Trump, really, because it's like he's anyway, but we won't get into that. But yeah, what did she just say? Besides that, she said something else.
Attempting to escalate tensions with Russia by accusing it of doing something that it was not actually doing.
Yes, and when it comes to that, it's like, do I necessarily believe everything that the Russians say? No, but I'm frankly more likely to believe them, the Russian government at this point, than I am to believe the American government at this point. That's a sad state of affairs, but it is how it is.
Doesn't mean that the Russian government is completely innocent, doesn't mean that we like Vladimir Putin, but it does mean that we want to be cautious in moving forward with any type of escalation toward war. And that's what I'm seeing from the Biden administration right now. It's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, so look, my fix here is relatively easy, so I don't want too much credit for it. So look, you usually resolve these in a simple way. Are we right to expand NATO all the way to Russia's borders on nearly every side? If we truly want peace and deterrence, that's probably less productive. It'll make us less safe, not more safe, if we put those missiles right on Russia's borders. So I don't think it's that productive to expand NATO that way. On the other hand, we're not going to want to lose face.
Again, definitely would have been good to have Russia as part of NATO, and then they could have been responsible for defending that area. Instead of American missiles in Ukraine, it could be Russian missiles in Ukraine, with the aim of stopping, shooting down Chinese missiles that might head that way, or Iranian missiles that might head that way. I mean, I realize that in the current state of affairs, Russia's kind of allied with those two countries, sort of, but I think if they'd been part of NATO, they probably wouldn't have such close ties to those two countries. Anyway.
And walk backwards, especially Biden, who's trying to prove that he's a tough guy in domestic politics. He's completely failed. So now he's going around saying, oh yeah, I'll push Russia around. So he can't say, no, we will withdraw.
He barely knows what's going on anymore. I mean, even his partially coherent speeches, you can tell that he's not all there. Even the good drugs, as Styx puts it, are is not enough.
Putting NATO into Ukraine as a request or anything along those lines. But what they
I do reference Styx from time to time. I don't know what he does these days. I stopped listening to him a while back, but anyway.
can do is say, okay, we have reconsidered the timing with which we will deal with Ukraine applying to NATO. Okay? And behind the scenes, you tell the Russian diplomats, okay, we're not going to do it. We're not going to do it for X number of years, 1 year, 3 years, 5 years. Publicly, we're saying we're still open to it. Every country has the freedom to choose NATO and to choose their alliances, but we will back away diplomatically for X number of years. Problem solved. That would
Can kick down the road. You could simply say privately to the Russians that they're never going to be in NATO. Like, we'll talk about it, but we'll never actually do it. Then the problem would, potentially actually be solved. Although it's only solved if you actually follow through, if the U.S. follows through with what they fucking say. And the Russians know that we lie because we've lied to them over and over again. So, anyway,
Russians would be at ease. They would be unlikely to invade in that scenario. We lose nothing. In fact, we're probably a little bit safer if we do that than if we expand NATO, which would be seen as provocative.
Definitely.
So that's the reasonable, relatively easy way to solve this. But the question is, does either side, particularly America in this case, want an easy resolution, or do they want?
Sadly, the answer to that is no. The people in charge over here, the illegitimately in charge shitbirds over here, want a war, or at least a lot of them do. Don't know if all of them do, but a lot of them clearly do. If we could separate out which ones actually do want to potentially, end all human civilization just because they hate Russia so much, then I would suggest rounding them up as traitors and executing them. That would solve the problem once and for all. It's like, oh, you want war with Russia no matter how many people get killed, over here and over there, then you need to die, you piece of shit.
Some sort of mess for some other reason that is not clear at this point.
Right. I mean, this could be an attempt at engaging in some sort of Cold War to sell weaponry. There's that possibility as well, but you're playing with fire because you're dealing with two nuclear countries. So if this is just
not only is that is true, you would be playing with fire and whatnot, but I fear that no, this is not simply an attempt to have a new Cold War so that we can sell weapons. No, I don't think it's as simple as that. I think you've got some horrible people in positions of power who really, really hate the Russians, and they want a fucking war with Russia. Potentially at all costs. Certainly at the cost of the lives of ordinary Americans and Russians, obviously. And those people are evil. Those people who actually want, that, they really do need to die. I don't know who all they are, but if we could figure out which ones they were, I would say, people behind the scenes pushing, trying to push our country into war with another nuclear power and risking billions of lives potentially, they definitely need to be sent straight to fucking hell.
attempt to bolster the defense industry, it's pretty sick, right? And incredibly risky. And one of our viewers wrote in and says, why would Russia be worried about Ukraine joining NATO? There's no threat to Russia from Ukraine. They're the ones who invade and annex territory. Well, I would argue if there was an international alliance.
America, invades and annexes territory, through other means, shall we simply say. It's like, like this is a continual thing, propaganda piece against Russia, is this idea that, they're so evil because they invaded, Georgia, and they, Soviet Georgia. And they, it's not Soviet anymore, but you know what I mean. It's not the state of Georgia, but the, country of Georgia. Although technically that state is a country. Anyway, we won't get into it. But they invaded, there and wasn't there another place? And then they took over Crimea from Ukraine, and people keep on acting like that was evil Russians invading and conquering people that didn't want them, but that's not true. The parts of those countries that they invaded and took over were populated by, I believe, mostly ethnic Russians who were very pro-Russia, and they preferred to be part of Russia than to be part of whoever they were part of before. So they did enjoy popular support in what they were doing. So anyway, it's not. Anyway, but yeah, that's popular line. Fucking John McCain. Thank God he's dead. Thank you, Lord. Thank you for taking him off our hands. He was warmongering after Russia really hard and kept, back in the day talking about how they were invading Georgia or whatever, and it's like, it's a tiny democracy fighting for its life. It's like, we need to bomb the Russia. Fuck you. Fuck you, you worthless bastard. Anyway, like I said, thank the good Lord he's gone.
That was providing weaponry to Mexico.
And that brave tumor of his. Lost a great American.
Specifically in regard to the United States, would we see that as a threat? And that's what's happening here. The United States government over the past, since 2014, has provided literally billions of dollars worth of weaponry to Ukraine. And I think that we need to be real about how any country would perceive that, especially when they share a border with the country, receiving the
Yeah, didn't Germany do that with Mexico in World War II?
Weaponry from a country that is hostile to it, like the United States,
Yeah, and so, in fact, Putin asked in his press conference today, so if we have a conflict with Ukraine and Crimea, which Russia now currently controls, but Ukraine has claim to, he said, am I now in the middle of a war with the rest of Europe and America? Well, if Ukraine's in NATO, yes, technically we would be at war with Russia. And that is a very, very dangerous situation.
Exactly. And again, another reason why it would have been good to get Russia into NATO. Because then they wouldn't probably have needed to feel like they needed to invade anybody. Because if they were in NATO first and then we got the other countries into NATO as well, then they'd all be allies, and it'd be kind of weird to explain why you're invading your ally.
You don't have to lose face if you're the one who needlessly started the conflict in the first place. Back away, back away. I'm ready to be super aggressive with Russia, diplomatically, financially, you name it, in the appropriate circumstance. But this doesn't look like it's anywhere near appropriate. So I don't know what the hell we're thinking. And guys, last thing is that it's so hard to tell America's intentions.
How can the post-Trump GOP claim to be anti-Russia? Well, easily, because, well, first of all, is it really the post-Trump GOP? I don't know. I think he's still considered by many people to kind of be the de facto head of the party. And I don't, this fucking comment is probably, is probably assuming that the horse shit things that the mainstream media pushed about, oh, the Russians got Trump elected or whatever. No, they didn't. That was all garbage. But the GOP can certainly be anti-Russia because most of the GOP were not pro-Trump. Trump dragged them kicking and screaming because Trump was a champion of the people. And the GOP were mostly a bunch of shitbag politicians, who are in it for themselves, not for the people. They weren't populists, so fuck them. So, but hopefully a lot of pro-Trump people will be elected. Trump style people or whatever, populists, will be elected and replace the old guard in the GOP. And the GOP will be hopefully transformed into, a much more, a party much more actually focused on doing what their goddamn constituents actually fucking want for a change. And I think probably most Americans don't hate Russia, and we don't want war with Russia. Not a, you know, not a, I mean, and frankly, no one should unless they're just suicidally insane. But anyway, I mean, you know, not that Russia would probably survive an all-out war with us, but we certainly wouldn't survive an all-out war with them either. So, you know, it's anyway. But yeah, the GOP being anti-Russia, that's easy. You know, I rather, you know, it's like it's very unfortunate that the Democrats decided to choose the tactic that they did to try to smear Trump with the idea that, oh, he's working for the Russians or whatever. Because if they hadn't done that, then probably Trump would have done what it looked like he was starting to do in the beginning of his presidency, which was pursue closer relations with Russia, which, you know, frankly, that would have been a good idea. It, you know, not only would it, yeah, I mean, it at the least, it would have hopefully headed off problems like we're having now, but potentially, if you could split the Russians off and kind of put them in our camp instead of the Chinese camp, then it would help with, you know, isolating China. Yeah. But anyway, what's done is done. You know, the Russians are solidly in the, you know, in with the Chinese because we forced them to be, because the Democrats forced them to be. You know, not that most of the people, you know, not that most of the elected politicians in the GOP and whatnot aren't, you know, the same, you know, uniparty pieces of shit as well. But anyway, you know, so war with Russia probably also would mean war with China, you know, and vice versa, which means, you know, the reality, unfortunately, and you know, as much as like I said, I don't want war in Ukraine, but if it has to happen, as I said, it'd be better for the Russians to win and win quickly and decisively. However, I have different feelings about Taiwan. I don't believe that you know, for the sake of the Taiwanese people and for the for certain strategic reasons as well. You know, I mean, some of that could be, you know, addressed eventually, but in the short term, no, it couldn't. So for various reasons, I don't think we should allow Taiwan to be recaptured by China. But we have managed to put ourselves in a position where we're probably not going to be able to stop the Chinese. When they decide that they're ready to take Taiwan, they probably will. And we probably won't be able to stop them at that point without getting into a nuclear conflict. And, you know, because we pushed the Russians to be, you know, to have closer ties with China, that possibly means that we wind up in a nuclear war with Russia too. Now, the United States could survive a nuclear war with China, potentially. Not, you know, like we definitely would not be intact after that war, but we could potentially, you know, survive it. Like some of our cities would survive, not all of them, but some of them. Whereas China, given the concentration of its population centers and whatnot, if we were prepared to just nuke them out of existence, we probably could manage that and end them as a threat forever. But you know, again, that comes down to the, you know, question of whether you should or not. I mean, more harm is done arguably by that course of action than any other, including just walking away and letting them, you know, do whatever they want to the Taiwanese. So, anyway, no easy solutions to that, but again, it's like, you know, just there's so many mistakes that have been made. Yeah. And I don't know that, you know, even if different people had been in charge, I don't know for sure that they would have made better choices, because after all, it's like hindsight is 2020. So, but anyway,
because our officials are bribed by so many different interests that it's hard to keep up. Could it be that there's some giant hedge fund or several hedge funds that have bet one way or another on the Ukrainian economy or the Russian economy, and they are funneling millions of dollars to Democrats and Republicans? Yeah, that's totally possible. Look, in this case, I have no evidence of that, but I'm just giving it to you as an outline.
On the one hand, he is correct to consider the possibility of such things. On the other hand, as a non-believer, as an atheist, he fails to consider that there is a supernatural force at work here. Yeah. Fails to recognize that the enemy of all really wants this type of thing to happen. And so, through his agents, he will work towards it, regardless of whether it's actually in anyone's fucking interest or not. So, and one would think that it would be plain that even the potential for a nuclear conflict between the top two nuclear powers on the planet, with between them, with enough nukes to annihilate the entirety of the human race several times over, one would think that that'd be pretty clearly a bad fucking idea, no matter what anybody thought they might have some way to to profit off of it. It's like, no, there's no good way to profit off of this. No. Anyway,
In this case, that is not at all outlandish. Could it be the defense contractors? Could it be the oil companies? And they think it'll drive up prices. Anything is possible. In fact, a foreign government could be doing it. How? They just give money to our politicians. It's so easy to buy them. For the foreign governments, you need a tiny bit of loophole, but we explained that yesterday. Democratic majority for Israel right now is trying to buy 15 different seats, and they say, yeah, it's for Israel. It's not for America. We want to buy it for Israel. That's just American politicians that they buy. So could somebody be buying a war with Russia? I don't know. Bribery is legal in America, so anything's possible.
That is one of our many, many problems.
We'll keep filling you in. And look, if our analysis ends up being wrong, we'll be the first to come on the show and tell you, oops, we were wrong and we apologize. But this is the way that I'm reading the story and analyzing the story as someone who has no dog in the fight. I don't have any love for the,
Wait a minute. Yeah, no dog in the fight. Anna, you live in America, don't you? As a matter of fact, you live in LA. It's going to be one of the major cities targeted by nukes if this thing goes nuclear. You do have a dog in this fight, Anna. Everyone does. In this case, the potential for a war between the top two nuclear powers on the planet, everybody has a dog in this fight. Holy shit.
US government and its warmongering ways. Same with Vladimir Putin. He's not innocent either. But you got to look at the facts on the ground. And more importantly, I'm going to go with what,
as near as I can tell, he is definitely the lesser of the two evils.
Ukrainian intelligence is saying. I would argue that's incredibly important.
No, and I want to be clear. We're not wrong. It might turn out that Russia does take action at some future point.
And for a change, he kind of is correct that he's not wrong. We're not wrong. He says that every single goddamn time they talk about anything, and 99% of the time he is wrong about whatever the fuck it was he said. But for once, like I said, the reason why I'm covering, for once, he actually is kind of right.
But that doesn't change the facts on the ground today. And today, Ukraine is saying, America, back away. When if they were about to get invaded, they'd be in a panic saying, give us weapons, give us a way to defend ourselves. They're asking Europe to back away. So the facts now are relatively clear. They could change later, but right now it doesn't look like Russia's the aggressor. Thanks for watching the.
No, of course they're not. As as Fox Day has pointed out, it's clear who the evil empire is this time around, and this time it's us. It's America that's the evil empire. Wow, that was actually longer than the last video that I did. The last video was only this is actually an hour long. Well, I guess I had more to. I had more commentary to offer, I suppose, than I first expected. All right, until the next one.
Strange game. The only winning move is not to play.